I will preface this video with saying I have been a knitter for a very long time. Crochet is more new to me, as far as actually knowing how to do it. That said, I think I can give you some pointers for illustrating both. And it comes down fundamentally to looking at the shapes that the yarn is making as it goes through. When you are doing knitting, and I'm just going to real quick make myself a couple swatch boxes here. Knitting falls in these nice rows, and so you can start out just by figuring out how big your stitch is compared to your fabric. So if it's really chunky, you'll probably be able to see stitches well defined. If it's not chunky, you might not even really be able to see the stitches. You would only be able to see large patterning like lace or cables and various techniques, but you're not going to see the individual stitches. But we'll talk about how to draw individual stitches first. So when you are knitting, essentially you have a loop of yarn that is coming up from a previous loop of yarn. And you are pulling yet another loop through. So you just keep pulling these loops through and making this indefinite chain. And then the chain is all attached together. But what you end up getting is this kind of V shape. And if you simplify it down to its very simplest shapes, it almost becomes like a herringbone pattern. So you get a shape that tapers and comes like this. And then that is met by another shape that finishes out that loop. And then on this side, you get another taper and a curve and finishes that out. So if you keep in mind that it's each a loop, it's easy to find where these go, and then you just have to switch sides of how, so that your one side will come down this way, going this direction, and then the piece that it touches will be going in the opposite direction. So now this piece comes through going that way, and this piece will come up. Yeah. So yeah, knitting and braiding has a lot in common as far as what it starts to look like. And so just making sure that you're thinking about this as a full tube of yarn that's coming through, and you're giving it enough width here to think about that. And then, so if you can see the actual knitting, this is kind of what knit stitches look like under a microscope. Most of the time you're not going to be able to see this much detail. So another thing that you can do is simply use a template like this to do little V's. Oh, you want to keep them somewhat consistent. And knit stitches are longer than they are wide. So you can start figuring them out by just doing this little like V shape. And then halfway in between, you have another V shape that comes up in between these, which are where these stitches are meeting up. And it makes kind of an inverse chevron. And I just kind of give each little stitch a little bit of a bubble on the outside line, coming back in, outside line coming back in, bubble, bubble. So these would still be pretty big stitches, and if I just continue going with this, eventually it starts looking more realistic. Where it's kind of these V's with a curved side, and then they meet up with other V's. As long as you kind of give this curve and then just fill in a little bit of shadow, anywhere that doesn't meet, you'll start getting it to look like a knit stitch. When you are knitting and you want something more dramatic, you're going to keep in mind that these little stitches, like a cable, for example, these little stitches, what they're doing in a cable is crossing each other. And so you're taking stitches that are running one direction and changing that direction by pulling them in a different way and pushing other stitches under them. So for example, if I'm going to make a cable running from this otherwise plain, just knit fabric, I need these stitches to go this direction, and I need these stitches from over here to cross. So what I need to do is bend the stitches to fit the fabric, and if I'm this close, then maybe I am drawing in the stitches. If not, what you can simply do is draw in that curve of these stitches cross and start going over here, while as these stitches cross and start going over here. So you don't have to draw all of this, and then you can just maybe just give the edge, break up that edge a little bit as though it had kind of that like curvy nature of the yarn. So this is the knit side of fabric too. There's something called the purl side of fabric, which is the back side of a knit stitch. And the back side of the knit stitches looks like little bumps or little dashes that sit together like this. Because you're seeing the back part of this loop right here. So you're seeing just that back part. So sometimes with cables like this, in between where we have like the nice knit stitches running, we might end up with some purl side of the fabric showing, some purl stitches, and so those would be done in these little loops that stack underneath in line with your knit stitches. So if you have a knit going into a purl, it ends up looking like that. But I usually just put like little curves to indicate the purl side of my fabric. whereas I might have more of the V's to indicate the knit side. If I'm illustrating a sweater, I don't go into all of this detail absolutely everywhere. That's super overwhelming for the eye. What I might do though is say I have a sweater where I have the neckline. I have to move this down. Maybe at this scale, and then shoulders, wherever my sleeves join up. Knitwear sleeves and sleeve design is a whole nother thing to talk about. But here, literally what I would do is ribbing is often done one column of knit stitches alternating with a column of purl. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make that purl column. It recedes in the knitting. I'm just going to make essentially a darker area and highlight the top of mine with any of this like extra detail I want to give it. But once again, I'm just drawing the effect of it rather than every little thing that's actually there. So I might just give just a little example of the texture. Say this is a bulky yarn and I can kind of see. I'll draw that in. I'm just going to end it right there. And then if I wanted there to be a cable, I would sketch in the shape of this cable. And usually a cable just like kind of crisscrosses itself back and forth down the length of your knitting. And then I would give myself the general shape of this cable. And I'm just drawing actually like little heart shapes is essentially what I'm doing at this scale. And I'm not drawing in every single one, I'm just drawing in the sides of some of them. And then I could put in a few little dashes to indicate a purl side there, or I could just leave it. If I wanted to do baubles, I would draw in where my baubles are, and I would just keep them a little lumpy because I'm thinking they're made up of several threads. Kind of almost draw them in like little popcorns. If I have a change in my knitting direction, I'll probably indicate that. So if I had maybe some increases that led to my sleeves here, or some larger stitching or something like that. And then I might otherwise just kind of scatter in some little suggestions of like a V shape. Be like, okay, the rest of this is just knit. And then of course if there's any color changes or patterns, I'm just focusing on those versus actually any of the stitches. So if this is the same kind of sweater, but it's a colorwork sweater where I have some cool patterns, I might say, okay, well, the patterning on it runs like this, and that's more what I'm concerned about. Getting on there is the shapes I want. And then however I came in to fully render it out, I would just give them a little bit of the shape of the stitches. Now if it's like really, really smooth, you might not really see it. It might basically be like designing on like a graph paper. or you might have a, if you're actually a knitwear designer, you probably have a knitting graph paper which lays out your design for you, and the graph is set up so that they're a little bit taller than they are wide. And then you'll say, okay, so these are the colors that are done in this color, and make a chart like that. So, but that would definitely be if you were getting more into like specifically knitwear design and charting in color work. But just for drawing it, I would just try to give it a little bit of the texture of whatever yarn you're using, and an idea of what is there as far as stitches. So if there's a cable, you know, these big shapes. If it's lace, you know, you'll draw where there's open holes along your stitching. And usually laces and cable, like cabling and lacing all goes together. There's lots of different stitches, and I could bring in we could look at a like what are called stitch reference books or stitch Bibles that just have examples and upon examples of different types of knitting that you can break up. But you always want to keep in mind that it's made up of yarn. When it comes to crochet and demoing crochet, a crochet stitch is also a loop pulled through loop, but it is done rather than holding each of your loops at once. It is just worked from a single stitch going back and forth. And what a crochet stitch looks like drawing for me is you have a loop that your hook is running through. When these get tied off, they kind of lay over top of each other like this and pull through each other. Very similar to how knitting looks. And then the next stitch would pull through. Oh, that was out of the way. So it's kind of a chain. There's also, in crochet stitches, the yarn kind of gets wrapped more than in knitting. So you kind of want to do a wrap, and then there's bars followed by the stitches kind of changing direction and going this way and being chained together. What you can do is if you're doing like a granny square or something like that where you just want a square of crochet, you can decide where your center is and then basically do these like long petal-like shapes for wherever you have a bar. They tend to be a little bit wider than they are at the top, and then there will be a bar that goes all the way around. And then usually more stitches in each of the little openings. So I just kind of draw them in like petals. And I might not even do all of these little stitches that go around. If I was drawing this, I'll draw it at a bigger scale. And just wanting to draw a granny square, I would say, okay, if this is 2 stitches, this is 2 stitches, then to keep making this grow bigger, I need to put an extra stitch in between these. So I'll have another stitch come in, and we'll do 3 this time. One, two, 3. And then I might say, okay, there's going to be a chain here, but it's eventually going to get covered. And I'll just keep doing 3s on the way out. Maybe they're just a little bit bigger. Oh, forgot one. So these I just kind of work in a petal shape. And then I don't have to worry about all the stuff that goes in between them. But I can bring in a couple examples of a crochet granny square, that way we can look at them up close and think about how we would draw them. Yeah. I could have taken a little bit more time and gotten it neater, but kind of just pulling these longer braided loops through areas of chained stitch. You could also literally just kind of keep the edges curved and draw these little double petal things. We can put another one here. So those just kind of build out like rosettes is what those squares do. And then they have shapes that build in on the corners too. I'll definitely bring in some examples though, because drawing this kind of stuff without an example, unless they're super familiar with it, is confusing. Like even these granny squares, I'm like, okay, how did this go? But I'll draw them in. The biggest thing is just to keep in mind that any of these shapes is a full round piece of yarn. So, and when you're doing a stitch in crochet, it's essentially triple the width of your original yarn, and for knitting, it's double. Yeah, we don't talk about it the same way, but weaving, you know, you have in and out of the same idea, or it's crossing over and under, but it's not loops. I love fiber arts, but bless the people who draw like knitting and crochet diagrams, because I would lose my mind. It's a whole bunch of figuring out how string crosses over itself. Yeah, so even if you're drawing weaving up close, a bunch of what goes over, what goes under, over, under, over. I was drawing a woven basket just the other day where I completely got lost in how the weaving worked. But it's pretty rare that you're drawing something this close with this much detail. Usually you're just drawing kind of the, maybe you change up how your line is shaped because of it. So I was gonna draw like, okay, I need this granny square for a jacket. I'd probably give myself some lines here first that I'm gonna follow. Say, okay, get shapes here. I need to fit 2 of them in each space. Oh, yes, yes. No, definitely tell me that. So, I have that, and then I'm just going to put here, leave that open, here, that way I can put some more shape there. And then I didn't really put that close enough together to, that's going to be really big now. Yeah, and I would just figure out like the basic layout of, it's getting too big and I need to divide these shapes up more is I think what I'm deciding. So I need to make these a little bigger down here. Funky little shape. And I might just have some things going on at the corner. But I'm not trying to draw in each stitch, I'm just trying to get in the major shapes. And then I would repeat that as often as needed to get the look that I'm going for. If this is bigger, I'm probably, you know, if I'm drawing this at a scale, let me find a person that I've drawn. You know, even at this scale, honestly, probably what I'm mapping in is about the size of the blocks, and then a little flower shape like that. And that's what I'm calling it for a, yep. Just giving it like, okay. It has some sort of big centerpiece and then kind of a flowery look thing that comes out. And giving each of these squares just like a little bit of curvature to them.
I'm not